Well, hey everybody. Hope everyone's having an okay evening. It's been a minute since I've seen everyone. I I miss you guys. I'll be honest, but I'm glad that I don't get an opportunity to talk to you very often because usually the only time that I take to talk to you guys is when the weather's bad. We've got a hurricane headed this direction, so I thought I'd do a quick video. I had a couple people request me kind of walking you guys through kind of what's happening as we head through the next couple of days. As you can tell, the technology here, hold on, oh, there we go, hasn't been used in a while either. It's a little sleepy too, so bear with me as we kind of move through the forecast over the next couple of days, and hopefully the technology can kind of keep up here. So this is the forecast as of 7 o'clock, the intermediate advisory. Now keep in mind, as we move through hurricane season, I don't think I've ever explained what the different advisories are. So there's one at 4, for Central Time. There's one at 4, there's one at 10, there's one at 4 in the morning, 10 in the morning. Those are the meat and taters ones. Those are the ones with all the good stuff. The middle advisories are basically there to kind of massage the forecast and make sure that what the National Hurricane Center is seeing or what they put in their last update is still happening, or if there's been a change that they can update that. In this case, the 7 o'clock advisory that just came out, we learned that it is in fact a hurricane. So if we go back over to the satellite, and I've run this back quite a ways, but you can see in the last handful of frames here that we get a big burst of convection down here. We're looking down here, by the way. There's a big burst of convection in there over the last handful of hours. Originally, we can run this like back really far, so we can go back quite a ways. Originally, we were watching these two, we call them kind of hot towers on here, kind of spin around the center a little bit earlier today, and these towers, they'd go up, they'd fall apart, they'd go up, they'd fall apart, they'd go up, they'd fall apart, and finally through the day today, we saw convection kind of take over near the center that was able to, for the most part, wrap itself around the center, and that's why we're starting to see intensification. Not rapid intensification quite yet, but intensification over the last handful of hours, which is why we were kind of stuck at like 60 and 65 miles an hour for so long with Francine, and everyone's kind of waiting and waiting and waiting. And we're now finally starting to see some sort of intensification. And the reason is that the tower, the cumulus clouds that were going up around the center of the storm kept going up, falling over, going up, falling down. And now we got a big burst of convection, and it was able to kind of insulate the center. And now we can start to drop the pressure. Plus, when you get big bursts of convection like that, you tend to drop the pressure around the center of the storm anyway. So that's one reason that we're seeing that. But that's why this intermediate advisory, this 7 o'clock advisory, shows that it's now a hurricane. And to give you an example of why this is an intermediate advisory, as of 4 o'clock, the discussion here, they don't update this. By the way, it shows it at 90 miles an hour near landfall. I think they still have this as now a Category 1 at landfall, barely. Category 2 starts at 96 miles an hour, and let's say this thing gets up to 95, so for all intents and purposes, it's probably going to be a weak Cat 2, according to the Hurricane Center's most recent forecast. We look at the arrival time of these winds, the most likely, and the percent chance that you deal with tropical storm force wind. This hasn't changed much. The timeline has, but the graphic for the most part hasn't changed much over the last about 24 hours. In that we're probably going to see wind starting up, most likely dealing with tropical storm force wind across southeastern Louisiana as early as about 2 o'clock, give or take, on a Wednesday afternoon. That's tomorrow. And then by Wednesday evening across parts of South Mississippi and into parts of Alabama. And the percent chance that you deal with these tropical storm force winds better than 50% for basically places that are going to be west of I-59 and south of 84. You're better than 50% chance that you deal with tropical storm force wind. Elsewhere, it's a little bit lower. I will note that in my county-by-county forecast that I put out, I'm talking about wind gusts, and in some instances today I did sustained wind as well. Those are two separate things. The the forecasts that you see here are sustained winds, not the wind gusts that you're going to get in some of the rain bands, as well as just when you're able to mix some of the wind all the way down to the surface. So keep in mind that even though this graphic, you may look at this and say, you squint real close, hey, wait a second, hold on. Am I 50 or am I 60%? You're probably still going to get tropical storm force wind gusts in some of the strongest showers and little thunderstorms that are wrapping around the center. If you live on the coast or near the coast, we're talking 3 to 5 feet of surge along the Mississippi coast. So for you folks in Hancock, Harrison, and Jackson County, you folks are going to be looking at 3 to 5 feet of surge, 4 to 7 feet of surge, kind of from Grand Isle back off to the west. And then as you make your way along kind of the rest of the Louisiana coastline all the way to about past Marsh Island, you're talking about 5 to 10 feet of surge. And my guess would be there's probably going to be places in there where it's a little bit higher. Also, above ground level down in the marshes of South Louisiana is something that isn't, let's be real, all that measurable, because the land isn't even above sea level. So, you got grasses and stuff and plants growing kind of out of the water. So yeah, kind of keep that in mind as well, especially if you're watching along the Louisiana coast. So let's see, we did arrival time. We've done, wind speed probabilities here. I just wanted to show the hurricane one. If you're not living in South Louisiana, you're probably not going to be dealing with hurricane force sustained wind. I think everybody else just tropical storm force wind and a lot of maybe hurricane force gusts at times, maybe tropical storm force gusts at times. But in terms of sustained wind, unless you're right on the coast, as you'll see here in a second, you probably don't have as much to worry about. I'm going to run this back, and I'm only going to put this on kind of a 12-hour loop. And then I'm going to run this to just the short guys here. Now let's do... Well, come on. I wanted all of them over a short time period. Maybe not that short. There we go. I wanted that one. Bear with me, folks. You can see that this thing is starting to kind of ease a little bit north of kind of due east from Brownsville. And I wanted to also share the radar with you guys, too. This is the radar. We can kind of zoom in here. That's the center of the storm. It doesn't have an eye on it necessarily, but you can kind of see an eye on radar. And again, this is from Brownsville. You've got Corpus Christi here. I'm hanging out in Houston, almost due north of the center. And this thing's going to be moving this direction over the next few days. And I mentioned this the other day in the post, I think it was the day before yesterday, about how there is a little trough, little area of low pressure that's going to be up here. And with this area of low pressure down here, as it moves to the northeast like that, and as this swings this direction, you end up doing a little dance between the two. And we've seen this a couple of times over the years. You guys may remember with Marco and Laura a few years ago we did this, where this is going to deflect a little bit farther to the east. Very briefly, this is going to deflect a little farther to the south, and then it's going to turn back north again, and then this is going to kind of turn back off to the east. And so this may not be reflected in the forecast path very easy to pick out, but you can kind of see it in here, and then it kind of pivots here, and then we kind of go due north. And it's going to slow down as you get that little pivot, it's going to slow down a little bit as well. And we can kind of see that on some of the model guidance here. As it kind of moves towards shore, it kind of slows down. And I really want to highlight something else here. First off, it moves towards shore, and this is just one model. I've got like infinity I can look at here. I mean, we can pull all of these if we really wanted to. You may say, well, Nick, is this the most accurate one? No, not really. None of them are going to be perfectly accurate. I would argue, I suppose I could say this is the most accurate one, but it isn't perfect by any means. This isn't exactly how it's going to shake out. And anyone, by the way, during hurricane season, most of you guys know this, but if you're ever following somebody on Facebook or Twitter or TikTok or wherever you guys hang out on social media, and they tell you that this model is the best one for hurricane tracking, or this model always gets it right for hurricanes. Know that is marketing. They're lying to you. And maybe they believe that, so maybe it's not so much a lie. I shouldn't say that. They may believe that, but if you really get into the nuts and bolts, it may have, any one model can do well with 1 or 2 storms, or maybe 3 storms in a row. But as we say around these parts, even a blind squirrel can find a nut. So, I would be careful listening to people and saying, oh, this model always gets it right, or this one got the last one right, so it's definitely going to get this next one right, because that's not how weather models work. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox. As this thing moves ashore, notice how it slows down. So we're cruising along just fine, and then we kind of slow down and pivot and turn north. And also look how the south side of this system just erodes away so quickly once it moves ashore. This is why I tend to think that this is going to be kind of not a quick storm, because it is going to be moving slower, but the most intense part of the storm may be short-lived for folks farther to the north. So as you move away from the coastline, because this thing's going to get eroded away off the southern edge as it passes by to the north, you're probably going to end up in situations where, if you're watching in, let's say, Bogalusa, you're going to say, okay, I'm probably going to get the meat and taters of this storm. Just for the record, you folks in Bogalusa, not to call anyone out without mentioning any other towns. We'll get to that later. But you're probably, going to get punched in the face from this thing, so to speak. You're probably going to take some of the roughest parts of this hurricane. Now, the roughest of the storm will be right along the coast, but as it moves north, you're probably going to get the most of it the longest. But as this continues to move north, you folks in, let's say, Bay Springs, it's not going to be as intense for as long. It'll be more of a slow burn for you guys, because number one, by the time the strongest part of the storm gets up to you guys, it'll be weaker. And number two, the south side of this thing is going to be eroded away a fair bit by the time it gets that far north as well, because dry air is going to be pushing in on the back side of this thing. And so you won't have to deal with a whole hurricane. You'll only have to deal with half the hurricane, which, bonus for you folks living north of 84. And let's see if I can kind of highlight this. I wonder if I've got in my bag of tricks here. I don't think I do on this one, but I bet you I do over here. We're going to look at the upper level moisture, and I'll show you guys what I mean about this. See all that brown? That's a bunch of dry air. And as this thing moves north, there it is. See how this dry air back here is pivoting around? And it's just waiting. It's just waiting to get in there. And then as this thing moves ashore, here comes the dry air. It starts eating up and gobbling up all this dry air. And that's about all she wrote for this thing, especially on the southern edge, because the dry air is getting in here. And then this thing kind of curlicues around for a while across parts of Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Mississippi. As just a shell of its former self, all it's going to be is some gusty wind and a little bit of rain. Locally, if we don't look at freezing rain, anybody think we're going to get any freezing rain out of this? Out of a hurricane? I'd love to see that. Instead, let's do this. We'll get in a little bit closer, and I actually wanted to look at some of the wind gust from some of these ensembles as this comes ashore. And notice down on the coast here, 60 miles an hour, 80 mile an hour wind gusts. That's pretty good for home. You folks in New Orleans dealing with wind gusts up to about 55 or 60 miles an hour. Same goes in Baton Rouge. And this is probably going to be some of the strongest wind that Baton Rouge has had to deal with in a while, probably since whatever it was, Zeta a couple years ago. And Slidell. And then as this thing kind of marches north, you can see the wind really does start to fall apart. There's still tropical storm force wind gusts, but this isn't nearly as bad as we were thinking, I would say, as little as 6 hours ago, 12 hours ago. Originally, the thought was for you folks in Hattiesburg and north toward Jackson, you folks in Laurel, most of Jeff Davis County, folks like Bassfield down to Columbia in Marion County, even Macomb, as you head out into, kind of Pike County. We thought that this was going to be a little farther to the west and a little bit stronger, so we were going to get pegged with a whole mess of wind. Instead, what we probably have to deal with in here is going to be a slightly more, I don't want to say robust, because that's probably the wrong word, but meaningful, perhaps, tornado threat. we kind of dig in here, you can see that, big rounded hodograph, winds coming in from the east and turning back around to kind of the southwest. I tend to think as this thing moves ashore, and again, I would pay less attention to the specifics of the timing here, because I tend to think that this one's moving a little slower than reality. This has landfall at like 7 o'clock. I tend to think landfall is going to be a little bit closer to 4 or 5, but it is going to slow down as it moves ashore. So I think by the time we get like here, this may be right, which means that as we head through the overnight hours, if you're living north of Highway 26 in Mississippi, north of Interstate 12 in Louisiana, you're probably still going to be dealing with a quote-unquote severe weather threat, a high wind, heavy rain, tornado threat, probably a tornado watch at this point, through 2, 3, maybe even 4 o'clock in the morning before things finally subside. Now, the good news is the tornadoes that come with hurricanes like this aren't the big ones that we get in the spring or heck, even in the winter around here, E3s and 4s and such. These are going to be EF0s, EF1s, maybe as high as EF2. I want to say locally, I think as long as I've been covering the weather down here, I think we've had 2 or 3 tornadoes stronger than an EF1 during a tropical system. So it doesn't happen very frequently. It can, but it doesn't happen very frequently. So kind of keep that in mind. To give you an idea of maybe what another model is suggesting, if I can get this thing to re-render here, I'll reload the page real quick, hopefully, and I'll run through this model for you guys. Yeah. Maybe I'll just run through the wharf instead, because unless Tropical Tidbits is having problems. Of course, this was working right before I started. But you can see here, this is 21Z on Wednesday. This is about 3 o'clock. And we're talking about nearing landfall on the HMON model. This is one of the tropical models. And so there we go. And here's the H-Wharf. Same idea. As you move closer to shore, here we are at 3 o'clock with landfall. And notice that there's plenty of rain already happening across parts of southeastern Louisiana, South Mississippi, and into parts of Alabama. This part right here, you see this line, this kind of daisy chain of thunderstorms and kind of heavy rain. This is, I think, where some of the strongest wind gusts are going to be that are not in kind of the eye wall, so to speak, or the core of the storm. And as we kind of move through time, this actually pushes all the way into parts of Alabama pretty quickly on this model. On other models, it lingers around across parts of South Mississippi for a little bit longer. And I think this is where we're going to have the strongest wind that isn't, again, in the eye wall, mixed down to the surface, as well as the higher tornado threat. So as you're kind of watching this develop and move ashore, here we are at 3Z. This is about 9 o'clock at night. And then here we are at 6Z, about midnight, give or take. So notice that even when we make landfall at 3, we end up in kind of the same place as the other model, which had landfall at like 8, which is the center of the storm is barely into Mississippi some 6 to 9 hours later. So this is going to be moving pretty slowly by this point. However, the south side of it is getting eroded away. So you have less to worry about if you're south of the center of the storm. It's just a matter of when does the center get to you, which for some of you folks, it could be a while. So, and I know a lot of folks are probably more concerned, rightfully, about the gusty winds and the tornado threat farther to the north and away from the water than kind of anything else. Because, yeah, by the time it gets this far north, there's not really going to be much of a center left on this thing or an eye wall. Instead, you're going to be talking about some gusty wind, a little bit of rain, and then the tornado threat, which in this case would be in this northeastern quadrant. So here we are, let's call it midnight, in places from like I-20 all the way south to about Highway 98 and along 59 and points to the east are going to be dealing with probably the highest tornado threat at this point if this model bears out. So that's kind of a rundown of a quick look at the model guidance. I wanted to also let you guys know that the county by county breakdown is also up right now. Just in case you guys didn't know, I can walk you guys through some of this stuff real quick. Here's the latest forecast from the National Hurricane Center showing 90 miles an hour, at landfall, give or take. sometime on Wednesday afternoon. Probabilities, we already went through that. And then, kind of by county here, if you're along I-20 and maybe just to the north, it is going to take kind of a while for this thing to get to you. And keep in mind, you're also going to be dealing with this for a whole lot longer as well. I've kind of hedged this a little earlier in the evening. I mentioned this over on my Facebook post a little bit earlier. But I've hedged this a little bit earlier because I want to make sure, number one, just in case this thing does move a little bit faster and doesn't slow down quite as much like we've just seen on the model guidance. But also, I'd rather have you guys like at home and bored and being like, Nick said this thing was going to get here at like 7 o'clock and maybe it waits until 10 to get to your house. I would so much rather have that happen than have you be like, Nick says it was going to get here at 7 and then at 4:30, the wind really starts howling outside your house and you haven't had a chance to, bring in the trash cans or anything yet. So, but if you're living to the north, this is going to last a little bit longer. As you get closer to I-20, it's, again, still you're dealing with for about 12 hours of rain and wind for you folks that are to the north. And again, on the north side of the center, again, on the south side of the center, this thing's getting eroded away. As you move farther south, here we are at the 84 corridor. You folks also dealing with stuff for about 12 hours, and then stuff really starts to clear. The interesting thing about how this is going to impact people, if I go back up farther to the north here, roads may be briefly impassable due to some flash flooding. Trees may be knocked down with some scattered power outages. You may get a tree across a road as well. A tornado watch is possible. My guess would be the National Weather Service will probably work with the SPC to get a tornado watch up for a lot of places across the area. Just to kind of be safe and make sure that everyone's aware that that's a possibility. But as you get down a little bit farther to the south, now we're talking about numerous power outages, and if you need something to run, I know some of you folks run on, they've got oxygen. I've heard from people over the years, they say, look, I really got to know when power goes out because I'm using oxygen. This is where you start to run into that situation. If you're living along the 84 corridor and to the south, I need you to start thinking about having an option for a battery backup because I tend to think there's going to be more power outages for you folks. Now, the power outages are probably going to be more robust the farther west you go toward 59 and 55. But for you folks out in Wayne County, I still think that that's going to be an issue. And as you get even farther to the south, you folks on the 98 corridor, at this point there may be times where roads are impassable due to downed trees. Winds are probably going to knock over and blow around things that aren't secured. Not because we're talking about hurricane force wind, but tropical storm force wind can do that too. You guys know what happens when it gets good and windy across the area. Not only are branches blown out of some of the trees, but, if the garbage can isn't, kind of like, maybe in the garage or tucked underneath, an overhang or something like that, that can end up in the street and rolling all over the place. If you got umbrellas or lawn furniture and trampolines, I'll say this again, trampolines, just make sure that those are taken care of because those will end up all over the place. Numerous power outages here. Just make sure you've got a battery backup again. If you need something, I think a tornado watch is likely once you get south of the 84 corridor. In particular, once you get really close to the coast. For you folks in Marion County, notice this isn't going to last 12 hours anymore because the south side of this is going to get eroded away. So I tend to think that for you folks that, 98 and south, this is going to be a shorter term event than for you folks up around I-20. The intensity will be higher, but the duration is going to be a little bit lower. Also, these rainfall totals up to an inch, kind of like as stuff gets going, from the morning into the afternoon. This is going to vary widely on location. If you end up in one of these feeder bands and it starts just pouring over the top of you, you can get an inch of rain in 15 or 20 minutes with how moist the atmosphere is. It's not going to take a bunch. And then about 4 to 7 inches of rain, lower rainfall totals as you go east, higher rainfall totals as you go back to the west. If you live along 55 or 59 or in between the two, do know that that's probably where the highest rainfall totals are from there all the way south and to the coast. In fact, here I can pull that up because I've got that. So here's your rainfall potential, and you can kind of see what I mean. That's 6 to 8 inches of rain. And 59 kind of runs right up there, and then 55 kind of right down here. So you're kind of bullseye of heaviest rain. And my guess would be, honestly, folks, this is going to shift a little farther off to the east with either the update at 10 o'clock or the update at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then let's get back over here. So again, 4 to 6 inches for you folks in Perry County and Greene County, 4 to 6, 4 to 7 inches of rain. It really does depend, that long daisy chain of storms that I was talking about, where that sets up and pivots around, is going to be a place where you pick up a lot of rain pretty quickly. For you folks along the 26 corridor, kind of same thing goes. I will say that numerous multiple hour power outages are a little more likely as you get down into Pearl River County, Stone County, George County as well, though maybe a little less likely because you guys are a little bit farther off to the east. Tornado watch is likely. I want you to be somewhere by about 4 o'clock tomorrow. And this is where we start to get into, you could get sustained winds for, or up to 60 miles an hour for, up to an hour. If this wiggles around as it's moving north and you guys, wherever you are in Pearl River County, clip the strongest part of the core of the eye of the storm, you could get sustained wind up to 60 miles an hour for 15, 20, 30 minutes, maybe even an hour. And you're talking about wind gusts up to, 65 or 70 miles an hour there as well. And these wind gusts are different. This is, outside of dealing with that core. If you get the core, obviously your wind gusts may be a little bit higher, 70 or 75. But other than that, probably about 65 miles an hour. And then I think by the time you get to Stone County, you don't really have to worry about that anymore. Wind gusts up to 60 miles an hour, maybe a couple of tornadoes. Again, up to EF1 in strength, maybe EF2 if you're super unlucky. And then as we get into the Mississippi coast, 4 to 7 inches of rain in Hancock County, sustained wind up to 70 miles an hour, again, depending on the specific track of the storm. Wind gusts up to 75. Harrison County, kind of same thing goes. You kind of ease off into Jackson County, stuff gets a little less kind of robust. Sustained wind, St. Helena Parish, I'm probably underdoing this a little bit, 55 miles an hour. It's probably a little bit closer to 60. Again, we're talking about the wiggling of the center really dictating how strong the wind is over here. But you folks are going to end up with a lot of rain down in St. Helena Parish. 5 to 10 inches. Tangabahoa, 5 to 10 inches. Folks in Washington Parish, 5 to 10 inches of rain. A lot of water coming down to the sky. You're going to get wind. You're going to get the tornado watch likely. You're probably going to have power outages as trees come down. If you get 5 to 10 inches of rain and a 40-mile-an-hour wind, you're probably going to knock over a fair number of trees. Livingston Parish, the same thing goes. St. Tammany Parish, same thing goes. Orleans Parish, now you're talking about, sustained winds 70, wind gusts up to 90 miles an hour. Alabama counties a little less robust. I'd recommend Spinks Magazine for more information than this on what's happening over in Alabama or coastal Florida. But wind gusts up to 55 miles an hour. EF1 tornadoes are possible for folks in like Mobile County. I got a couple of miscellaneous counties over here requested as well that I added to this. And of course, you can find this over on the app. You can find it on the website too. And if you guys have any questions about anything that's in here, feel free to kind of holler about this. But I wanted to kind of walk you guys through this real quick. This, by the way, I know sometimes you guys are probably going like, holy moly, this takes like forever to scroll down and through. And yeah, I know. But there's a lot of information on here. It takes a long time to put together. So please scroll through it and find your county and grab your forecast. I love the ads that I'm served on my own website for things I can't afford. Like, thanks, Google. Appreciate that. Neat. One last thing, and then I'll try and answer a couple of questions for folks. So if you do have questions, put them on there right now, and I'll try and jump over there here in a second. The wind field on this storm, because it's taking kind of a while, it's went up and down with those towers kind of going and coming and coming and going. And now we're finally getting some coalescence around a center. I tend to think that your wind field on this, just like the tropical storm force wind, sure, but just like the general, like, hey, it's pretty windy outside field, is going to be pretty fat with this. It's going to be pretty big. So you're probably going to feel the impacts of the wind before anything arrives tomorrow during the day. It's going to end up getting kind of breezy out of the east and southeast. And then as this exits, it's also going to stay windy for a little bit longer as well. Even though we're going to dry out the backside of the storm, we'll probably block some of the mixing down of some of the wind, so that'll help kind of slow things down a little bit. But I tend to think that we're probably going to hold on to a fair bit of wind for a while with this. It's just a big windy system. So kind of keep that in mind. And so, all right, let me see if I can scroll back up and grab any questions from you guys while I leave you with a pretty picture of the tropical system here. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments here, and I'll see if I can't get to some of these guys on here. Folks checking in and asking about, hey, what about kind of where I'm living? I would love to sit here and answer all of those, but I will tell you that information, as soon as this is over, you can find it over on the website. All that stuff that I just went through, it's all right there, all that same information. Somebody asked if I think this will actually make it to a Category 2 or not. Maybe. It kind of depends. I don't know that it necessarily matters at the end of the day if it's, wind at 95 or wind at 97 miles an hour. I think the impacts are probably going to be about the same whether it makes it to Category 2 or not, where it's really windy and again, over a large area, kind of windy. And then, the intense part of the core, more windy, and a chance for tornadoes and everything. But I tend to think that whether it's a 1 or a 2 or 3, frankly, the impacts for our area are going to be about the same unless you're living right along the coast where it's going to make a difference. How strong will this be by Thursday morning? I tend to think this will probably still be barely a tropical storm by the time you wake up on Thursday. And likely it'll be floating around somewhere north of Highway 98 and south of I-20. Barely south of I-20 maybe. If it doesn't slow down, if it slows down a lot, then it'll be a little bit north of 98. And it also depends on what time you wake up. But I think, winds, sustained wind probably somewhere, and again, this is going to be closest to the center of the storm, somewhere between about 40 and 45, 50 miles an hour by Thursday morning. The dry air is really going to do a number on this as it moves ashore, which is good news. Should the day be okay tomorrow in Collins? I think for most people during the day tomorrow, you're fine. It'll be rainy. It'll be rainy off and on, and it'll be windy off and on. But it won't be hurricaning outside or tropical storming outside. It'll be just kind of gnarly weather. It'll be pretty breezy and off and on rain and the rain that falls, right? Remember, tropical rain is like a mist. It's really, really fine raindrops. And so you'll probably look outside and be like, oh, that's not that bad. I won't even need a jacket or an umbrella. I'll just run out to the car quick and get whatever I left in there. And you will be soaked by the time you get back because while the raindrops are really small, the density of water that is falling out of the sky is going to be robust because this is a tropical system. Ask me how I've learned that lesson. So yeah, I think that goes for kind of everybody. Yeah. Why is the east side of the hurricane the worst side of the hurricane? In fact, I can do that with my good friend water vapor right here. Let's look at mid-level water vapor. So you see all this dry air that's over here and encroaching upon our friend the hurricane. Oftentimes, when you talk about I'll do it for you guys, the east side and the west side, right? I did that for you guys, east side, west side, east side. Yeah, I'm trying to go in reverse. I haven't been on TV for so long, I've forgotten how to talk in reverse to you guys. That's actually really funny. I was on TV for such a long time that this just became, pointing in reverse became second nature. That's actually really funny. Thank you for helping me discover that, Ivory. Thank you. That's actually a lot of fun to learn that I've forgotten how to do a thing. So on the west side of the storm, you tend to be pulling down air from the north. That tends to be drier and cooler. And on the east side of the storm, you tend to be pulling up air from the south, which is rich in heat and humidity. And on top of that, because this is usually these systems are moving north in some form or fashion, the east side of the storm also tends to set up a neat thing in the atmosphere where the air is turning the correct way with height to create tornadoes. And so that's why we look for tornadoes on the east side of the storm as well. Good question, Ivory. Let's see here. I live in Columbia. I know this is on the line. Yeah, a lot of you folks are probably a little too concerned with binary boundaries. Well, I'm living in Olo, so I don't have to worry about what the forecast is for Colombia, whatever. Here's the thing: hurricanes are big, 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 and so a wobble in a hurricane of 5 or 10 miles can drastically change, and to a storm that's 400 miles across, 300 miles across, a 5 mile jiggle is nothing. Happens a lot. That can have pretty big impacts on what you feel. So when you read these forecasts and you say, well, I'm on the county line, and one county is going to get 5 to 10 inches, and the other county is going to get 4 to 8 inches, and well, I just don't really know what to believe. Which one am I going to get? Well, it's probably somewhere in between the two. But I always say err on the side of worst possible outcome, because it's better to be prepared for something and then nothing happens than to think, oh, well, nothing's going to happen, and then you kind of get the worst of it. Will Hattiesburg get affected by this in any way? Yes, it will. So there's this is definitely a Hattiesburg problem too, for folks in Lamar and Forest County. That is a definite for surezies. Let's see here. Is the dry air going to get into the storm before it gets to Hattiesburg? Unfortunately, no. This thing isn't going to fully fall apart until it's like well north, and even then it's not going to fully fall apart. So it may not be quite as strong by the time it does, but you're still going to end up with a fair amount of rain and a fair amount of wind. All right. I haven't talked this long in a while too. Folks, so now we're getting into, I'm just kind of scrolling back through some of these things. A lot of folks just asking like, hey, what about where I'm living? I could answer those all night long until I was blue in the face, and I'd still get somebody that would ask a follow-up question. Oh, what about this place too? So as much as I would love to sit here and answer all of these, I'm just going to say, hey, check out the blog, check out the website, check out the app. All that information is on there, and I promise that county by county forecast should get you ready. If you still have questions, feel free to ask. So I'm going to call her a night here. Hold on a second here. There we go. I'm going to call her a night here, and hopefully I answered enough questions. It was great to see everybody that hung around this long. And if you have any questions, hit me up on Facebook. I'm happy to try and answer your question as best I can. Do know that my 9 to 5 is actually like a 5 a.m. 4 a.m. alarm kind of a deal, so I go to bed pretty early. So if you're asking me questions at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm not going to answer those very quickly, but I will get to them as fast as I can in the morning. So everyone have a good night. Stay safe out there. Do know that you don't need to be overly stressed about this, but do take the necessary steps to protect yourself from this thing as it kind of marches your direction. See you guys around.